Content warning. The content of this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or psychological advice. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any professional organizations. If you or someone you know is experiencing mental health issues or a crisis, please seek help from a qualified mental health professional or contact a crisis support service by dialing 988. Always consult with the licensed therapist or counselor for personalized support and guidance. All right, welcome to Queer in Here, Let's Talk Mental Health, and I'm Alicia Nolan. My pronouns are she, her, 2 times Amazon bestselling author, and also owner of Choose to Live. This podcast is dedicated to LGBTQ plus mental health. A diverse selection of mental health professionals and passionate storytellers will come together to create a safe and supportive space for listeners. Each episode features insightful conversations that explore the unique challenges faced by the LGBTQ plus community, weaving in personal narratives that resonate deeply with experiences of identity, acceptance, and resilience. Through expert advice and heartfelt storytelling, this podcast will not only provide valuable tools for coping and healing, but it will also foster a sense of belonging, reminding listeners that they are not alone in their journeys. By amplifying voices from all corners of the community, this podcast intends to inspire hope, spark dialogue, and promote mental wellness for everyone. I am very excited today to introduce Jessica Lahore, who has built a strong drag empire and does amazing things for the drag scene, and also Colorado's Drag Entertainer of the Year. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. And
Hi, I'm really excited. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And would you mind telling listeners just a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Jessica Lahore. I'm a local drag superstar here in Colorado, 11 years in the business, 9 years full-time as an entrepreneur, fitness fanatic, makeup enthusiast, philanthropist, entertainer, powerhouse MC who kind of travels around the state and the country doing what she loves. I've become more the influencer as of the last year and a half as well. So outside of just drag, stereotypical drag queen things, I do a little bit more on the queer spectrum of other forms of entertainment.
Yeah, I knew I wouldn't do the introduction justice, so I was just like, I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
No, you're fine.
I'm like, oh my gosh,
down like bam, boom,
I
bam.
see that. I love that so much. I was like, I'll get this going, but she's got the rest. Oh my gosh, because you do so much. Which I love, what you bring to the queer community and the drag community as well. It is an easy world we live in right now. You know, the climate for not just the queer community as a whole, but trans and drag. I mean, it's a difficult place to be in right now. So I appreciate who you are and what you're doing for the community. Let's get started just with your journey, the beginning, self-discovery, just all the things. What did that journey look like for you? And what do you, I guess, what would you consider the beginning of this incredible journey?
Yeah, I feel like it's a journey that never will end, which is the best part of life. And just being a queer person, things can ebb and flow depending on how you wake up that day and decide to live. But I would say the biggest major shift was probably being a junior in high school, when I mean, that was the first introduction to a queer person that I knew of that told me that they found me attractive, and that didn't make sense to me. In my household growing up, being queer wasn't an option. It wasn't something that we talked about. It wasn't even something that was promoted positively. I look back at my parents or my mom calling someone queer on TV and just not knowing what that was. Obviously not in the most heartfelt positive connotation like I would use it now, and not understanding that. So when I had another boy tell me that they had feelings for me, that really shook up the start to everything. If we're gonna go way back, that's the first thing that comes to mind of starting exploration of my identity, being then curious, not understanding queer relationships or romantic ones, the outside feeling of not just being focused on girls or women or anything in that nature. That escalated into college a little bit more when I had freedom to explore and be myself out of the house, which I feel like most people go through once they leave their parents' nest. They make their own choices, they develop who they are, and I ended up surrounding myself around a lot of positive queer influences, mentors, and just people that I would run into. I also went into college being able to self-identify how I wanted to. So even though at home I was still identifying as straight and I wasn't doing drag at the time because it just was easier at home, I was exploring being a bisexual human at the time. So what's the compromise here? Obviously, I'm very much into guys. There's a female piece. And at that point, I identified as like a cis man. There was no even question about my gender identity mixed in with that. I would say after some exploration with women, I found out that I came to the conclusion that I wanted to see my future with a man. So I moved from bisexuality to being gay. Again, my parents didn't know. My work life didn't know. I kept like 4 to 5 different lives, especially when drag came into play, with a lot of confusion. I remember calling drag disgusting at one point and calling it gross. And a lot of that was the lack of open-mindedness that I had, or the way that I would halt thoughts of doing drag or gender expression or anything too gay. Like I didn't want to be too gay. If I was, obviously that was a lot of just naiveness. And I really compare that to other folks that would use that language against me now. A lot of it is a lack of understanding, a lack of the willingness to be open-minded to have conversations. And so as I started being more realistic with myself and less delusional, I tried drag with a partner at one point, fell in love with it immediately that night. And he was like, "You're an ugly woman. You should never do drag." So I was like, "Oh, but I love this so much." And I was maybe an ugly woman, but I still wanted to do it. So that made things even more complicated because I was a gay man who still wanted to consider bisexuality. So the term wasn't there, but I'd say even more pansexual, even though I didn't know what that term was. I was experimenting with drag, and then there was a lot of confusion as to combining drag with my identity. So now that I'm playing in women's clothing and I enjoy it, does that mean that I'm trans? Does that mean that I want to be a woman? Because I was so focused on a certain type of drag, the pretty girl drag, the how do I pass in a crowd of people drag, not the scary, alternative, spooky, even clownfish drag that I'm wearing now is what I'd call it. A big shift for that was not having really acceptance from my family. So I kept everything separate. Nobody knew who I was in the drag world. Out of drag and makeup, nobody would ever see me out of makeup. No one ever would know my legal name unless they were paying me. Same thing is in my work environments. Nobody knew I was queer. Nobody knew that I was a drag artist. Same thing with my parents. They didn't know anything about drag. They didn't know anything about queerness. And if we're being vulnerable, because that's what this podcast is about, my dad was very forward about not wanting a queer child, and we were just alone in the house. And a big game changer for me about a year into drag was going home, him saying, "Are you dating any women?" I said, "No, Dad, I'm not dating any women." And he's like, "Well, you're not dating any guys, are you?" And I said, "No, Dad, I'm not dating any guys. But what would you do?" You know, I just played around. "What would you do if I came home?" And I said, "Yeah, this is my boyfriend. I'm dating a guy." And he was like, I would go into the kitchen, not even 5 minutes, take a knife and kill myself because I couldn't live knowing I had a gay son. That was like the biggest, probably traumatic impact that I had in my life in that moment. And it kept me quiet. It kept me silent for years, which then tumbled on so many other areas of body dysmorphia, depression, self-hatred, anxiety, just questioning relationships, a lot of hidden stuff. I tried to stay as secretive as possible because I didn't want to be the cause of that. Clearly, years down the line, when I had an opportunity to come out to my family, I kind of got a confirmation from my dad in that moment, years later in a group therapy moment, that he couldn't just buckle down and tell me that he cared about me, which was the easiest thing he could have done, and instead tried to, well, play it off like the tough macho man, you know. And I came out because of that. I said, clearly there's nothing holding me back anymore, and I can't be responsible for these actions, okay? And so that was a really big Kickstarter. I mean, immediately within a week, I started showing people who I was. I did a coming out video, and I showed people who I was out of drag. I immediately let so much weight off my chest, even though there was a little bit of confliction with my parents. So not only was I coming out as a drag artist, which was a whole different identity of me, that really allowed me to explore being non-binary as well, like a year later. So now I'm a non-binary drag artist who then is experimenting more authentically in their skin. I know this is long-winded, but we asked for the journey. So
no, I love it. Yes, keep it going. I love it.
Now I'm this non-binary drag queen who's now experimenting in self-expression, dating men openly, or dating humans openly, but mostly men, being more positive, in some lights about what I'm interested in presenting as a drag queen, and not really hiding that anymore, taking all those 5 different personas and putting them into 2, Jessica and Zach, my out of drag name.
Mm-hmm.
And that transitioned into meeting other non-binary people. And then I kind of became familiar with the term trans non-binary from a couple of my friends. This idea, and granted, it means something different to everyone. And that's the title or identifier I've stuck with the longest. So that's probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 years in now at this point that I've felt most comfortable with that identity, because I've battled a lot on the regular with what a transition would look like for me, and what is my gender expression look like, and what does waking up every day look like for me, while still kind of honoring this idea that I want to present feminine and masculine, but I don't want to identify as either, but some days I do. It was really confusing. So, and doing drag, sprinkle it all together, cherry on top. So I just decided that was the easiest terminology for me, and what I identify as a trans non-binary drag queen who wakes up every day as a human, and what you see is what you get. How I speak, how I dress, how I talk, how I act is just how I want to act that way, whatever that may be. And that may be more on the broski side, which is weird to say. It might be more on the feminine side, or a combination of things in between. And you just deal with the human that you get, as long as you're respectful to that human. And that's kind of where I've landed for a while. Probably up until this year, where at the start of the year, I really was set on transitioning more feminine presenting. Like, I was going to take hormone blockers, and had some medical complications that stopped me from that, which actually we can talk about it later if that's an interest, but I completely shifted. But that's where I'm at. It's been a 15-year plus journey from that moment with my dad, even prior to that moment with my dad, of being this confident and comfortable talking about it, and not being ashamed of any of those little pit stops along the way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's a lot, but there's so much to be said about that journey and being at a point of being comfortable with who you are.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. It can take a long time for people to get there. It can take decades.
And it's not over.
Yeah, it's not over. I mean, it's always a journey, you know? Gosh, I guarantee you there's so many people who can relate to your story. They're hearing nuggets in your story, and they're going, oh my gosh, I'm either living that right now, or I just went through that. It's the fact that you have grown into loving and being who you are is just fantastic. In fact, I listened to your podcast, your last podcast, Love, Love, Love.
Yeah.
And one of the most beautiful messages that I have had to learn is having to love yourself, and how important it is to love yourself. And I've spoken a couple of times on stage about my journey, where it's taken me when my wife died by suicide. After that, the journey that I have been on, I have started to actually love myself for the first time in my life. And again, that can take decades for people to get to that point. You know, just loving who you are as a person, because you can reflect that out to others in a much better way, you know? And
I have a really good friend, drag queen friend, icon in the scene, Shirley Delta Blow, who speaks it just what you said, in the sense of, once you show up in spaces authentically and unapologetically, or even with that self-love, it's almost like granting permission to the people around you to feel comfortable doing the same thing for themselves.
yeah.
And it's really contagious when you walk into a space, you love yourself, you're confident, you're speaking positively, and what it can do, just the same with a smile or positive energy into a space, and watching the mood shift from other people doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much power in that. And just hearing that and listening to your podcast, I'm like, man, just the take and the perspective that you have on it. So if you haven't yet, Jess Talks is the name of Jessica's podcast, and it's been going for you've had it for a while. I think there's like at least 50 episodes or close to 50
Yeah.
episodes on there.
It's
So
crazy to think that. Yeah.
I know that's a lot. I'm just beginning this podcasting journey, and I'm like, oh my gosh, 50 episodes. That's a lot. Yeah. But you have such great messages, and again, I think the authentic nature of podcasts like yours, like mine, and and especially in the queer LGBTQ community, it's so important because there's somebody out there that needs to hear it. Somebody out there is struggling right now that will listen to this podcast, your podcast, other queer podcasts, and be like, I feel like I'm not alone anymore. And I love that.
Yeah.
We can, you're telling your story and I can just relate so much to it. Just growing up in high school and not wanting to come out. I've talked about it before where there was like 2 people who came out in my high school and they were bullied and everything. So I think I was 17 as well, where I was, before I turned 17, right? It's like I was homophobic, like, ew, gay, ew, they're gay, gross,
Yeah.
but I knew that wasn't the case for me. Yeah. Yep. And navigating that, especially when you're starting to discover those feelings of maybe I am gay, but still trying to like avoid it or maybe deter it or whatever, but it's your truth at the end of the day, but still staying in the closet. I think I told my dad was great. I came out to him and he was just like, I'll support you no matter what.
Yeah.
But then I had my mom who, well, I told her I was bisexual and she started crying and then proceeded to try to set up a date with her coworker's son, like you get those reactions as well.
A little different.
Yeah, a little different. But I can't imagine what you went through hearing from your parent that they would,
I'd rather not live than
yeah,
to
they,
have a queer child.
yeah. What was that like? Like, how did that affect your mental health at that time?
It was destructive. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have the best mental health as it was during that
Mm-hmm.
time frame. Not only was I going through my own gender identity issues, my own questioning of myself, but I struggled a lot in college with depression, like many people do. It was so bad that I would be locked up in a dorm for days, not showering, not bathing. I mean, some things that I've never even shared anywhere else in the world. It was very bad. Empty to go food containers piled up, peeing in water bottles so I didn't have to leave. It was really, really awful. So to not have any escape where I felt like I didn't have a lot of friends to connect with at the time, or the people that I did have friends that tried to be friends with me, I was in such a bad mental space that I wouldn't even allow them to love me or be around me. Sometimes when you're in that dark of a place, doesn't matter how many people are actually there and you're not alone, you feel the most alone.
Mm-hmm.
But I was dealing with that, a lot of eating disorders, a lot of binding and binging and anorexia, and just a lot of diet pills, excessive drinking, a lot of the habits that just piled on, but I was doing it by myself. I was doing it in secret. So I would have enough energy to go to a class if I needed to, which was rare during that time. I'd have enough energy to go to work and pass it off like everything was fine. Some of the times, most of the people that are going through the hardest things are the ones that seem the most normal when you see them in person, and then you find all this out. And so knowing that I didn't have my parents to lean on was really difficult. They wouldn't understand. I couldn't tell them about anything, couldn't tell them about anything really, because it was met with more of a guilt, met with a you're not doing the right thing, you're not trying hard, it's not good enough. And so when that conversation happened, and I remember that my mom, my sisters even, but my mom in a different way even were like, well, maybe that's not how you remember it, maybe you're exaggerating. And I remember it like I could paint a picture exactly how that moment, it is so burned into my brain, the language that was used, the look that was used. My dad's not a joking person. He's very strong in his ways, in his words, in his practices, and things that you would never know unless you knew him. So to get something like that wasn't something I wanted to take off lightly. And I feared for many years after that warning that I would become the cause of my father's passing.
Mm.
Even though we didn't have a relationship, I could not be able to comprehend living with myself having that impact on him.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't going to happen, I didn't want to chance that. There's a lot of people that say, well, of course he wouldn't do that. Maybe he was just manipulating things. And of course, maybe that's true. I
Mm.
couldn't bring myself to get to that place as much as I meet other people that have a really tough time with their parents or relationships with people. And even to this day, I don't have a relationship with my parents. I don't wish ill will on them. I don't wish for them to die or be injured or hurt or to fail in life or to live unhappily or to financially go through stress or whatever. I don't wish that. It's too much energy to wish that upon people. My peace was letting that go when I made that choice to come out, take the time to heal in my own ways. But it put me in a downward spiral. It escalated my eating disorders, my drinking. It got to a point where I stopped hiding it. And it was almost like crying for help. I drank excessively in front of people. I made nasty comments about my weight and the way I was accepting food. I would throw up in the bathroom in front of people as loud as I could. I was taking diet pills in front of people. I was not hiding it anymore. And nobody did anything. That was the hardest thing, I think. It got to a point where I did on 2 different occasions try to take my life. And it was the worst feeling to feel like it took that until that moment for anyone to step in to stop it. Like it took to that point before people realized there was a cry for help, stop me from moving forward with getting into my car. It really, really messed up. Like that was the night it was going to happen, and control the situation.
Yeah.
And it really got awful. And I couldn't say that my dad was the only factor in that, but I can definitely put a huge piece of the escalation of everything that was already going on that nobody seemed to understand, hear, see, or witness, or I could talk to about, and push it forward as well, I'm never going to be able to come out. I'm never going to be able to be happy. So I might as well just be done.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're still here,
Yeah.
and you're a beautiful person. I'm glad you're still here.
You too. Thank you.
How did you pull yourself out of that darkness?
Honestly, the night that I tried to take my life and my friends stopped me, it was a huge reality check. And I had a really close friend who I'm still close friends with now. Her name is Crystal. She's another drag artist who I've known for like the longest time. If there's anybody that was a little bit more aware or visually aware about things that I was doing to my body and to myself, and she was one of them. And we got on the phone, and she gave me a tough love moment, to be honest, which maybe I respond to better than most. It wasn't coddling. It wasn't I hope you're okay. I mean, of course she said that, but it was really a slap in the face of why would you do that? Like, it was very much how long are you going? Like, she's like, as long as I've known you, you've let these demons take over your life, your success, your happiness. How much longer are you going to give in to these? You need to make a choice now. Are you going to continue to fall back into this path and hate yourself and not do anything about it and continue to be the victim and continue to, and it was really hard to hear, but it came from a really strong place of, bigger brother, bigger sister love that kind of got me together slowly, at least. I would say I'm still on a journey of self-love and acceptance, which never goes away. And if you're somebody that has ever experienced eating disorders, those are things that you never lose as you grow older. You just manage them differently. You're more cautious and cognizant of how you handle situations like that rather than being like manipulated and controlled by them. But I would say that it was, what was that? That was 2018 that I tried to take my life. And every day I decided to put some memes online and treat it like a diary. And it said, day 1, this is how I feel. These are the memes that are resonating with me. Today sucks, yada, yada, yada. And I started fixing some of that every day. Did that for 300 and something days, and then I stopped doing it online and I started doing it for myself. I started taking and forcing myself to look at myself naked in the mirror for like 15 seconds to 30 seconds a day, even though I hated it. and
Mhm.
I couldn't find anything. I would force myself to look at myself naked and appreciate the body that was in front until probably about 3 years in was when I started believing it. And I started, dancing in front of the mirror and smiling and being more comfortable being in my skin, and then forcing myself to say something positive, writing messages on the walls. I
Mhm.
started therapy 2 years ago, which was really late, but I handled a lot of shit on my own. I came forward with my sisters and told them about my experience, which was hard for them to hear, but also really healing for me to say out loud so that I wasn't holding on to this anymore. I took control, which a lot of people don't necessarily have the privilege of all the time, and made drastic changes from my approach to food and my approach to eating and working out to completely and entirely deciding to relinquish the weight of my father and my parents off of my shoulders. I made a decision. There was
Mhm.
no process. I made a conscious decision that as adults, they had the ability just as much as I had adults to continue a relationship with their children or not.
Mhm.
And if that was a choice that they were going to make, it was not my responsibility to educate my parents on how unconditional love works for your child. And I could have been a murderer. I could be in jail all the time. I could be an alcoholic, which I'm not saying is good or bad because I know everyone experiences their own things. I could be a lot of things. I could have not graduated from college. I could have not had a sturdy job. I could have not, I could be in debt, whatever you want to say. Yet but just because I'm queer, that would be the reason that they don't want the relationship with me. And I
Yeah.
couldn't comprehend that. I couldn't comprehend that. That's not my issue at that point. I was happier. Once I came out, I was happier and there was no stopping me and I wasn't going back. And I cut anybody out that wasn't willing to, and by cut out, I separated myself. My parents
Mhm.
aren't cut out for my life. They just choose not to be part of my life. They choose not to communicate with me. They choose not to be active. And you could say the choice is on me as well. And I could argue yes, but ultimately the ball's been in their court for many years. And I
Mhm.
don't appreciate that the only time there's any communication is at a funeral when it's a moment of judgment. Like, oh, people are dying. I better say I love my son now. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was a lot of determination. A lot of it was daily practice. A lot of it was getting out of my delusional state. I completely changed my brain and reworkings of my body, how I spoke about myself to myself alone and in groups, removing scales from my life, re-adding mirrors into my spaces. I'm dressing better, doing things that made me feel good on the outside as I wanted to feel on the inside, being more vulnerable of what was experiencing on the inside on the outside, and completely releasing my control that food had over my happiness. That was a big thing.
Yeah. Um, wow.
Sorry,
The
a lot. I'm apparently real
No.
chatty today.
I love it. Uh, just the amount of strength, the fact that you started to make those changes and take that control back on your own to start out. I know you said that you've been in therapy the last couple of years, but those first essentially 4 years, just kind of, you almost have to learn the tools needed for your mental health, doing the things like writing on a mirror. I've had to do that before, like just writing on a mirror, I love you, or saying I love you in the mirror. I talk about doing that a lot because it is so good for your self love.
And anyone that's maybe listening to this and thinks that, oh, well, that's not going to work for me, I don't even believe it. That's the point. You say it
Mm-hmm.
enough times until
Mm-hmm.
you start believing it.
Yeah.
You start saying it and repeating it, and that's the only thing that you can think of repeating, and you
Mm-hmm.
soon to believe it. It took about a year and a half, even 3 years for some other phrases before I actually started believing it. And it
Yeah.
sucked every time, but that's the
Yeah.
process. That's the
Yeah.
point. That's the point.
Yes. You're absolutely right. It is a process. It is an everyday thing, and you do learn to to believe it. It's the tools that we learn later in life. I just had this conversation with somebody earlier about how much we struggle. And then we get to a point, and for me, it's been in, my mid 30s before I really started to have the self-awareness to understand what my struggles were and identify them and actually work on them towards just being a better human being, not just to myself, but to other people as well. But a lot of it, and this, people think this is selfish, but it's about loving yourself. Love yourself first.
Be selfish.
Yes, be
Be
selfish.
selfish. You can be
It's
selfish without the expense of other people.
yes, yes.
It's okay.
In a kind of what do you call it? Indirect way. When you're selfish because you love yourself, you're loving other people as well. Because again, people can feel that. They can sense that energy about you when you love yourself. It can be absolutely projected to others. So, my goodness, alcohol. Let's talk about your relationship with alcohol, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because out of
Um,
curiosity.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, I am gifted and cursed with a high functioning tolerance to alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can outdrink my friends. I can drink. I know what affects me different ways. I can be many drinks in and feel completely fine, opposed to my counterparts that are drinking with me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also very thankful that I do not have an addictive personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, since I decided to make the drastic changes with diet pills and stuff like that, which was many, many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
any substance of any kind, any habit of any kind, I have managed to have the control entirely over. And that's from I'm in a stage right now that's called mindful sobriety is really what I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I mean, it was kickstarted because I got into a huge accident in April of this year,
Mm.
and I fell asleep at the wheel, and I hit a police car, which had a police officer in it, and I drove away from the scene, and I got dragged out of my house in drag, and I went to jail in drag, and I had alcohol in my system, even though I was not intoxicated, but I still had alcohol in my system. And it was at that moment that I realized that no amount, and I was celebrating that evening because I had won awards. And at the beginning of the year, I said, I have too much on the line for my career, that I'm too dedicated to making some successful things happen. So many things lined up that I'm not going to drink or smoke, or I'm going to do it, smoke weed or drink. I'm going to do it when it's a social event or gathering. And I decided to go out and celebrate, and I broke that rule, and the universe decided to slap me in the face, and I'm managing all of that. But I went cold turkey that day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the desire to stay sober my entire life. I want to be able to go on a vacation and have a drink or have a joint with some of my friends in a social setting, but I work in a predominantly highly influenced alcohol promoting sales is what I do for my shows and events. But I'd also say I'm arguably one of the entertainers in my scene that equally promotes mocktails and sobriety, even long before this accident, for
Mm-hmm.
many years. Sober spaces, sober options. My partner currently is sober. Alcohol has stopped having control over me once I decide that moment where I almost took my life. I decided to take control. I can choose just as much as I don't want to drink, or if I want to go party girl mode, or anything in between. And so I'd say it doesn't have the hold on me like it does for some folks that they have one shot and it's downhill, or anything like that. That's not how I function. I'm really appreciative of that, and that's with any substance, really.
Yeah, I am a one shot and I'm done kind of person. But I've been sober for it'll be 4 years in November.
Congratulations.
And thank you. I appreciate that. And that's just the path I have chosen. And not that I used to drink all the time. It's that I'm on the spectrum of dissociation disorder. So I think I have a much lower tolerance for alcohol than a lot of other people. So it doesn't take me much to black out.
Mm.
So after years of blacking out and trying to quit, and I've probably blacked out over 50 times in my life. I was just like, I can't do it anymore, and that's my control. That is a control. I have remained sober for 4 years. It's the longest that I've actually been sober, and I feel like I have taken control back, because it used to bring out the absolute worst in me, and that's my sobriety story. Relationships with alcohol can look very different for a lot of people, but taking your control back, no matter what that looks like, that's huge. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
That's a big step.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not something I decide to completely eliminate, but
Mm,
I I'm in control of when I would like to participate in
yes.
at this time.
Yeah.
Until all of this is resolved, I have no desire.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about like therapy. So you've been doing therapy for a couple years now.
Yep, 2
Um,
years in January.
what can you share when it comes to your personal journey with therapy? What can you share or encourage other people when it comes to therapy?
Do it sooner. Everyone needs therapy. Even the most sane people that think they have their shit together, that don't think that they need it, they all need it. I don't care how old or how young you are. Start them at 15. I don't care. No, but in all honesty, that is how I feel.
It's
But
true. It's
it's how I
true.
feel. But now that that aggressive part is out of the way, my journey, I hated therapy. I grew up in a household where
Mm,
my dad didn't believe in it. You're
mm,
kooky, you're crazy. Only kooky, crazy people go to therapy. And then it
mm,
was a combination of that mixed with, well, you don't need therapy. You need to talk to a priest because Catholics, they talk to a priest instead of a therapist. And that's
mm,
not how I wanted to. I didn't trust people like that. So I
mm,
went into the mentality that therapy was not an option. When I was in college, I tried a therapist out because they had free mental health services, which, if you're at a university, most will offer that for students. Check that
mm,
out. My experience was not good though. I went to a therapist one week, and the next week it was like she completely forgot me. She had no idea who I was. She had no recollection of any
mm,
conversation, my name, anything that I did. We started from scratch, and it broke me. I have a
mm,
huge abandonment issues
mm,
to begin with, and so many. So to feel forgotten instantly, I never wanted to go back, which
mm,
meant that I decided to handle things on my own. And I didn't seek therapy in other places. Even when I had health insurance through my parents, it wasn't something that I did. I started seeking therapy when I did a lot of the groundwork myself and I was ready to take some of those steps. But I understand that everybody is capable of taking those steps with themselves. They need that help. And I don't know why I have such a strong will or control, and I'm proud of that. But even when I did a lot of the work, I wasn't able to progress healthily without the help of somebody to do it.
mm,
So I decided to get health insurance, which was a huge game changer. And my only priority for my health insurance outside of cost was that it included free mental health services. And I found health insurance that I can go every week, and it is completely covered by my health insurance.
mm,
And I found a great coverage. I went and talked and sat down with somebody, and there are options for people. There are so many options if you're willing to sit down and talk with people to find the option that works best for you. So I found a woman. I said I wanted them to be queer. I wanted them to be female presenting. It didn't matter if they were trans or anything, but I wanted them to be female presenting. I have obviously triggers with male influences in my life. I have triggers with straight people don't understand the queer experience, and I don't want somebody sitting there trying to explain
no.
my queer experience, and then I'm like, well, you're straight, you don't get it. So
Yeah.
I don't want you to sit there and try to. So I found a lovely woman named Barb, who is an older woman. I wanted her to be older than me, who's queer. And we went one session, and the first session, well, let me back up. I went to somebody else, and she decided not to show up to my first session. I waited outside her office for 45 minutes, and I said, I'm literally here for abandonment issues, and you didn't
Oh,
show up.
wow.
And I was almost deterred. It had taken 29 years for me to even consider going to a therapist ever since that one time in college, and the
Mm.
first one is going to abandon me like that. The hell.
Oh,
So
boy.
I decided not to feel deterred by that. I
Mhm,
decided to recollect myself and find another person, and that's when I found Barb.
mm,
I've gone to Barb every week for almost 2 years. This 2 years this January. We talk about everything. The first day that we met, I didn't hold back. I don't hold back at all. That's part of the therapy experience. If you don't go and you're not willing to completely shed every disgusting, dark, shameful, guilty, angry, hurtful, happy, destructive, sexual detail of your life with this person, it will not work. It's just putting time away and a waste of time for both parties. Get your shit out in the open with this person and find someone consistent. She remembers me. She remembers dates. She checks in. She recognizes my issues. She challenges me. She doesn't just agree with me. She sees through my bullshit. She's great. And I wish that I would have found her so much sooner in life. Or somebody sooner in life to get things kickstarted, because I've learned and done so much work in the last 2 years that I probably could have worked on so much sooner. So if you are hating therapy like I was, you have to just shut up and give it a try. I'm so sorry. And if you're worried about costs, there are options. There are so many options. You just have to be willing to put in the work. And that's with anything. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent. That's with therapy. That's with anything mental health. That's with an eating disorder. That's with a self-hatred. That's with anything. If you're not willing or wanting to change it, nothing's going to change. You have to have even an inkling that you want that different life for yourself, and nobody can tell you. Otherwise, people are just nagging you. You have to want it. And if you have it, capitalize on it. Take it and make it work. I'm so sorry for everyone that's watching, but I'm so serious. I wish that I would have done it sooner and not been controlled of thinking it was the worst thing possible, or that I was insane, or they're going to put me on medication.
No, please be aggressive. Again, somebody's listening to this and they're going, oh my gosh. Conversations like this literally save lives. There is somebody right now who's thinking about therapy and they're like, I'm not going. And they're listening to this.
Love that I got that day. And now I'm giving it back.
There you go. And it changed your life, and it's going to change.
Hold you. Let's get to business.
Let's go. And one thing about therapy is I've heard so many stories about, I've tried that once, and there's so many different therapists out there with so many different backgrounds, and I have never met a therapist that operates the same as another therapist. Not that I've met them all, but, try again. There's pages like psychologytoday.com where you can go on there, you can filter you can filter out gender, what their specialty is, location. You can filter out all the things and find a therapist that you can at least do a consultation with. And if it doesn't work, then you move on to the next. There's so many different therapists out there. And when it comes to healthcare and insurance, that's a pet peeve of mine, because my ultimate goal is mental health reform. Because yes, there are a lot of resources out there and sometimes you got to find them, but I feel like we should do more for our society, because 1 in 5 individuals suffer from mental illness, and it's probably more than that. It's significant, and we still don't do enough for mental health care. I even hate using the word care in there, because it's really not.
It's the bare minimum.
It is the absolute bare minimum, and we have to do better as a society. But there are still options out there that people can find. You really have to want it. You have to want to help yourself, and you will find it. So again, go to therapy. Yes. We all have so much learning to do, and I would not know as much as I do about myself if I didn't go to a therapist and do exactly what you said, which is you have to be raw. You have to be willing to share. You have to be vulnerable. You have to tell the deepest, darkest things about yourself in order to really get something from it. And it's scary. It can be scary, but it is so rewarding. I can't imagine now not going to therapy.
Literally, it's the only appointment I'm not late for.
Right?
I
hear that.
Never late to therapy. I soak up every minute of that hour spot. I will not be late.
And it's, by the end of therapy, you're like, man, I learned something new about myself every time, and having a therapist to challenge, you is, it can be scary. Again, it can be scary, but it's so rewarding.
Yes.
Um, is there nuggets of advice? And this is my favorite question. Okay. If there's any piece of advice that you could provide to the queer community, the LGBTQ plus community, what would that be?
You have me think about this when
Mm-hmm.
you messaged me, and there's a couple different directions that I can. Obviously, I've been very, I wouldn't say preachy, but very opinionated in this podcast. That a lot of the things that have changed for my life have impacted me, and they will hopefully be nuggets that you can take away too. But if there's anything that I've been really challenged with, especially with a lot of the conversations we've talked about, suicide prevention specifically, there is nothing more valuable that you can have than reclaiming the power to wake up and have a brand new day, to exist in a world that really is more beautiful because you're in it. And you don't really realize that until you start losing the people that are closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that there's this aspect of tomorrow is not promised. So why appreciate who you've got and what you've got today, that even the things that seem the shittiest and most detrimental or the most hurtful all have the ability to heal and reclaim into the next day for a brighter moment and a brighter future. You have so much more control and power than you may give yourself credit for when you feel powerless and the most alone. That you have a little bit of choice and a little bit of control over waking up and choosing how you're going to spend that day.
Mm-hmm.
Checking in on people, loving yourself a little bit harder. Are you going to be upset about something that happened 2 weeks ago? Are you going to get out of bed today? Are you going to just tell somebody in your life that you care about them? Are you going to tell yourself that you care about yourself and that you appreciate who you are? Maybe you are broke. Maybe you are on the verge of losing your house. Maybe there's these detrimental things happening in your life. You have to have some sort of strength and ability to find what the next step of progression is and not what's going to hold you back.
Yeah.
I know it's easier said than done. Appreciate the things that you have right now. You have,
Yeah.
everyone says you only die once. Well, you actually, or YOLO, live. What is YOLO? You only
You
live
only
once.
live once. Yeah.
Well, I changed the phrase. You only die once. You live every single day. So
Oh,
live it.
I
That's
love
what I
that.
say.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your story and being
Yeah.
vulnerable with us. Again, follow Jessica Lahore on podcast, Jess Talks. Would you like to share your socials
Yeah,
with
you can
everybody?
find everything with jessicalahore.com or
Mhm.
all social media platforms, JESSICA and then LWHOR, no E, because I'm illiterate.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Please leave comments for Jessica or myself about this episode. You can also follow Queer and Here on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Queer and Here Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. You are loved. You are enough. See you next time.